Hey everyone, welcome back to Old Master Channel. Today we're diving deep into the mesmerizing world of Edvard Munch, one of the greatest masters of expressionism. Over the next 23 minutes, we'll explore 5 of his iconic paintings, uncovering the secrets behind their creation. Edvard Munch, The Scream. They say a painting can whisper. Some paintings can shout. But only one painting in history screams, so loud, so piercing that it echoes across time. Edvard Munch's The Scream is not just an image, it is a sound. A cry carved into canvas, vibrating in the silence of museums, reverberating in the minds of all who dare to look. But what if I told you that this painting was not born from imagination alone, but from an actual moment when Munch himself felt the world collapse into a shriek of terror? It was January 1892. The sun was setting over Oslofjord. Munch walked along a path with 2 friends. Suddenly he stopped. The sky turned blood red. The air thick like molten metal. The fjord blackened, and the trees stood as silhouettes against the burning horizon. Panic clawed at him. In his journal he wrote, "I felt a great scream pass through nature." His friends walked on, but Munch remained, trembling as if he had heard the earth itself cry out in pain. That moment would never leave him. Years later it exploded onto canvas. Creation. Munch painted several versions of The Scream between 1893 and 1910. 2 in paint, 2 in pastel and 1 lithograph. The first, painted in 1893, was not meant to be beautiful. It was meant to wound. He painted on cardboard, cheap and fragile, as if even the material itself should feel unstable. His hand trembled, his strokes frantic. The figure, sexless, skeletal, was not a person but a ghost of humanity reduced to pure anguish. The sky blazed in orange and red, the fjord twisted into deep blues and greens. Munch painted as if possessed, confessing to the canvas what words could not contain, the terror of existence itself. Process and technique. Notice the spirals. Everything bends and curves as though reality is melting under pressure. Munch abandoned rigid perspective, letting the landscape ripple like sound waves. The figure, pale and hollow-eyed, presses its hands against its skull, an echo of Munch's own migraines and panic attacks. The colors clash violently, orange against blue, red against black. There is no peace here, no balance, only collision. Munch once said, "I do not paint what I see but what I saw." And in The Scream what he saw was not nature, it was the collapse of his own psyche. Historical context. The late 19th century was an age of anxiety. Industrialization was transforming cities into machines of smoke and steel. Science was unraveling old beliefs, leaving humanity adrift. And in Munch's personal life there was tragedy. His mother died of tuberculosis when he was just 5. His sister Sophie followed when she was 15. Munch himself grew up frail, haunted by illness. His father, a deeply religious man, often told him that sickness was punishment for sin. Death and guilt hung over his childhood like a shadow. By the time he created The Scream, Munch had already lost faith in stability, in certainty, in peace. The painting was his confession. Life itself was an open wound. Symbolism. The figure in The Scream is not screaming. Look carefully, the mouth is open, yes, but the eyes are wide as if hearing something unbearable. Munch explained it himself. It is not the figure that screams, it is nature. The blood-red sky was inspired by the Krakatoa volcanic eruption of 1883, which painted the skies of Europe with crimson sunsets for years. The figure becomes the vessel through which the universe howls. It is not simply fear of death, it is the raw terror of existence. Reception and legacy. At first critics mocked it. They called it ugly, hysterical, even grotesque. In Germany, where Munch exhibited it, audiences were outraged. But the painting was unforgettable. Like a nightmare you cannot shake, it burrowed into the subconscious of an entire century. By the 20th century, The Scream became more than a painting. It became an icon. A symbol of modern anxiety, of existential dread, of the silent terror inside us all. Today it stands alongside the Mona Lisa as one of the most recognizable images in art history. And yet, unlike the calm smile of Da Vinci's masterpiece, The Scream does not soothe. It unsettles. It stares at us and asks, "Have you not felt this too?" That moment when the world seems too heavy, when time melts and the soul trembles with fear. Munch painted that moment for us all. Closing note. In a world full of portraits, landscapes and still lives, Munch gave us something else entirely. He gave us sound without sound. A painting that screams across time. And as long as humanity knows fear, pain, and the fragility of life, The Scream will never stop echoing. Self-portrait with burning cigarette. There are self-portraits that flatter. There are self-portraits that immortalize. But then there are self-portraits that bare the soul, raw and wounded, as if the artist has turned his own face into a battlefield. In 1895, Edvard Munch painted himself holding a burning cigarette, not as a confident man of success, but as a ghost hovering between life and death. This was no vanity. This was a confession. The hook, a man surrounded by death. Munch had always been haunted by illness. Tuberculosis stole his mother when he was 5, his beloved sister when he was 14. The shadow of death followed him into adulthood, and by his late 20s he was convinced his own body was failing. Illness, insanity, and death were the black angels that stood at my cradle, he later wrote. So when he painted self-portrait with burning cigarette, he wasn't simply capturing his likeness, he was documenting his decay. The painting is not a mirror. It is a diagnosis. Creation. Painted in 1895, the work came at a time when Munch was increasingly isolated. Critics dismissed him as disturbed, immoral. He drank heavily, he smoked constantly, and he carried with him an air of doom. His cigarette, lit and glowing, became more than a habit. It became a symbol of slow suicide. He painted himself with gaunt cheeks, hollow eyes, and a pale, corpse-like face. The background is darkness. There is no comfort, no warmth, only void. The smoke curls upward like a ghost escaping the body. The portrait feels less like a celebration of self and more like a farewell. Technique and atmosphere. Unlike the sharp brutality of the scream, here the brushwork is restrained, almost quiet. His face emerges from the black with eerie stillness, as if floating. The orange tip of the cigarette burns against the gloom like the last ember of life. Notice how Munch makes no attempt to disguise his sickly features. He paints himself as fragile, on the verge of collapse. The hollow eyes, the sharp lines of his jaw, the unnatural pallor. He is half man, half phantom. The smoke itself is almost alive, twisting like a spirit rising from his mouth, suggesting that life is slipping away with every breath. Historical context. In the late 19th century, tuberculosis was everywhere. Cigarettes were both fashionable and deadly. But for Munch, the cigarette was not only a modern accessory, it was a metaphor for time burning out. While Parisian artists painted themselves with brushes, palettes, or wine glasses, Munch painted himself with fire and smoke. He wanted to be remembered not as a man at his peak, but as a man consumed. At the same time, Munch was beginning to gain notoriety in Germany. His exhibitions were scandalous, shocking polite society. People said his art was ugly, distorted, decadent. But in the underground circles of symbolists and expressionists, this raw honesty was intoxicating. Munch was not painting appearances, he was painting the soul, diseased and restless. Symbolism. The cigarette, of course, is central. It is both life and death, fire and ash, desire and destruction. In Munch's hand it is not glamorous. It is poison, a reminder of fragility. The darkness around him is not merely background. It swallows him, suggesting the void that waits for us all. He does not fight it. He does not pose heroically. He simply exists, exposed, vulnerable, dissolving. Even the smoke carries weight. It rises, disappears, leaves nothing behind. Just like breath. Just like life. Reception and legacy. When the painting was first shown, critics were scandalized. A self-portrait like this was unthinkable. Where was the dignity? The pride? The heroic self-image that artists had upheld for centuries? Munch had stripped all of that away. And yet, over time, this painting became one of his most haunting works. For modern viewers, it feels almost prophetic. We see in it the fragility of human existence, the honesty of a man unafraid to show his own decline. In an age of photographs and perfect portraits, Munch gave us something more enduring, the truth. Closing note. In Self-Portrait with Burning Cigarette, Edvard Munch does not give us the artist as legend or genius or master. He gives us the artist as man, mortal, fleeting, dissolving into smoke. His face hovers in the dark, the flame glows faintly, and the question lingers. Is this a portrait of life, or the memory of someone already gone? Like the last curl of smoke from a dying ember, this painting reminds us, our time is brief and every breath carries us closer to the void. Moonlight, 1895. The moon has always been a symbol of mystery, of lovers, of dreams, of shadows that stretch across the earth when the sun retreats. But in Edvard Munch's hands, the moon becomes something else entirely. Not gentle, not romantic. Instead, it is a cold spotlight on human loneliness. Painted in 1895, Moonlight is not a simple nocturnal landscape. It is a stage, a confessional, a silent cry beneath the indifferent glow of the night. And behind its serene surface lies one of Munch's most personal stories of desire, betrayal, and unbearable isolation. The Hook, a woman at the window. At first glance, the painting seems quiet. A woman stands at a window. Outside, the moon casts its pale light across the room, cutting the darkness into strange patterns. But look longer and the silence grows suffocating. The woman is alone, framed by the night. She does not look out. She does not smile. She is still, as if frozen by something she cannot escape. For Munch, this was no random figure. It was memory, sharp, painful, unrelenting. Creation. In the mid-1890s, Munch was tormented by his relationships with women. He longed for love, but every encounter seemed to end in obsession, mistrust, or despair. His most turbulent affair with a woman named Tula Larsen nearly destroyed him. She was wealthy, possessive, and their relationship swung wildly between passion and cruelty. Munch's Moonlight was painted in the middle of these storms. And though he never admitted it outright, the figure in the painting bears resemblance to Tula, a woman not embraced by love but trapped in its prison. The work emerged during a time when Munch was experimenting with psychological interiors. The moon, the walls, the woman, they were not objects. They were symbols of his own emotions poured onto canvas. Artistic process. Unlike his more chaotic brushstrokes in The Scream or The Sick Child, here the lines are calmer, almost restrained, but no less unsettling. The moonlight slices through the room like a knife, its cold glow dividing the canvas into sharp contrasts of dark and pale. The walls lean in, trapping the woman in a claustrophobic box of shadow and light. Her posture is rigid. Her face indistinct. She is less an individual and more an archetype, the lonely woman, the abandoned lover, the eternal captive of the night. Even the colors betray a kind of spiritual chill, icy blues, muted grays, and a pale yellow glow that feels less like warmth and more like sickness. The entire scene breathes unease. Historical and social context. At the time, women were often painted as objects of beauty, muses for male artists. But Munch went further. He painted the psychology of women, not their outer appearance but their inner torment. To many in conservative society this was scandalous. To others it was revelation. Munch's Moonlight also reflects the symbolist movement sweeping through Europe in the 1890s. Artists and writers turned away from realism, searching instead for hidden truths, for the shadows behind the visible. Munch, however, did not just dabble in symbolism, he lived it. His paintings were visions of his inner world, unfiltered, uncomfortable, unavoidable. Symbolism and interpretation. The painting is thick with metaphor. The woman, perhaps Tula, perhaps a ghost of every lover Munch lost, represents confinement and longing. The window, instead of opening to freedom, it becomes a barrier, a reminder of the world she cannot touch. The moonlight, cold, sterile, unfeeling. Unlike sunlight, it offers no warmth. It exposes but does not embrace. Some critics even see Moonlight as a portrait of depression itself. The figure isolated, the world beyond unreachable, the light sharp and merciless. Reception and legacy. At its first exhibitions, Moonlight did not cause the outrage of The Scream or Madonna. Instead, it quietly unsettled. Critics struggled to explain it. Was it a portrait? A landscape? A psychological drama? Over time, however, the painting became one of Munch's most haunting depictions of loneliness. Scholars now read it as a meditation on the impossible gulf between men and women in his art, always desiring, always failing, always estranged. For modern viewers, the painting resonates in unexpected ways. The woman in Moonlight feels timeless, as if she could be standing there today, staring into a night that offers no answers. Closing note. In Moonlight, Edvard Munch gives us not the romance of the night, but its sorrow. A woman framed by shadows, a glow that reveals only emptiness, a window that offers no escape. It is a painting that whispers, not screams. But the whisper lingers, echoing in the mind long after we turn away. And perhaps that is what makes it even more haunting, that in its silence, it speaks louder than words. Madonna, 1894 to 1895. She should be holy. She should radiate purity, serenity, divine grace. That's what the word Madonna usually means. But in Munch's vision, the Madonna is not the Virgin Mary. She is not innocent. She is not untouchable. She is desire incarnate. Her head tilted back, eyes closed, lips parted. Her body is both exalted and damned. And the red halo around her head does not feel sacred. It burns like a warning. When Edvard Munch unveiled Madonna, the world was shocked. For some, it was blasphemy. For others it was genius. For Munch himself, it was a confession of his obsessions, his fears, his tangled war between love, lust, and death. Hook, a painting that offended the sacred. Imagine standing in a 19th-century gallery, surrounded by traditional portraits of saints and landscapes, and then seeing this. A half-nude woman, her body arched in ecstasy, her face caught between prayer and seduction. It was the Virgin Mary reimagined as a lover at the moment of orgasm. Critics called it obscene, sacrilegious. But for Munch it was not provocation for its own sake. It was truth. The truth that love and death, ecstasy and despair were inseparable. Creation. Munch painted Madonna between 1894 and 1895, at the height of his Frieze of Life project. A cycle of works exploring themes of love, anxiety, jealousy, and mortality. At this time his relationship with Tula Larsen was spiraling. Their passion was volatile, consuming, and deeply destructive. Munch's jealousy and fear of intimacy collided with his obsession with women as both goddesses and destroyers. Out of this turmoil Madonna was born. She was not simply Tula, nor any one woman. She was every woman Munch had loved, feared, or lost, embodied as a vision of both salvation and damnation. Artistic process. Look closely at the canvas. The colors are not warm and inviting, they're feverish, unsettling. Her skin glows with pale, almost ghostly light. The background bleeds into deep blues and reds, as if her figure emerges from a void. Around her head is a blood-red halo, not a symbol of sanctity but of danger, lust, and sacrifice. Her hair flows like dark waves, framing her body in movement that feels almost alive. In later lithographs of the painting, Munch added disturbing details. A writhing sperm cell in one corner and a shriveled embryo in another. Here he made his meaning unmistakable. Love, sex, creation, and death, they were all one endless cycle. Historical and social context. At the end of the 19th century, Europe was still steeped in Victorian morality. Women were placed on pedestals as pure wives and mothers, or condemned as temptresses. Munch shattered that binary. His Madonna was both virgin and whore, sacred and profane. She was life-giver and destroyer. To audiences of the time this was scandalous. For Munch it was honesty. His work reflected not just personal torment, but also broader anxieties of his age. The late 1800s were obsessed with questions of sexuality, morality, and degeneration. Diseases like syphilis haunted public consciousness. Munch's Madonna embodies this fear, that passion could destroy, that desire could kill. Symbolism and interpretation. Every element of the painting speaks in symbols. The red halo, not holiness but blood, passion, sacrifice. Her arched body, both offering and surrendering, caught in the tension between life and death. The embryo and sperm in later versions. Stark reminders that intimacy leads not only to creation, but also to decay, responsibility, and mortality. Some critics say Munch's Madonna is not a blasphemy, but a hymn to the raw truth of existence. That every birth is shadowed by death, and every kiss carries the echo of the grave. Reception and legacy. When first exhibited, Madonna scandalized audiences. Religious viewers called it perverse. Others were mesmerized by its brutal honesty. Over time, it became one of Munch's most iconic works. Proof of his ability to strip away illusions and confront the raw, uncomfortable core of human experience. Today, Madonna is regarded as one of the defining masterpieces of symbolist art. A painting that dared to challenge the boundaries of spirituality, sexuality, and mortality. Closing note. Munch's Madonna is not the comforting mother of God. She is the eternal paradox, holy and damned, life-giver and destroyer, ecstasy and agony entwined. It is not a painting you simply look at. It is one you feel, deep in your chest, in your gut, in your blood. And when you walk away, her closed eyes and parted lips follow you. Not in blessing, not in comfort, but in a haunting reminder that love, desire, and death are forever inseparable. The Sick Child, 1885 to 1886. Before the scream, before Madonna, before the fame and controversy, there was a single memory that haunted Munch's entire life: the death of his beloved sister, Sophie. She was only 15 when tuberculosis claimed her. Edvard was just a boy. He never forgot the sound of her breathing weakening, the pale glow of her face against the pillow, the helplessness of watching life slip away. Years later, that wound would reopen in his most personal, most painful painting, The Sick Child. Hook, the painting he could barely finish. Munch worked on this painting for over a year. He scraped, repainted, erased, and layered. He confessed later, It was as if I was painting with my own blood. Why? Because this was not just a portrait. It was a memory he could barely endure. Every brushstroke tore open old wounds. Every line dragged him back into that room of grief. Creation. Painted in 1885 to 1886, The Sick Child was Munch's attempt to confront the most formative tragedy of his youth. His sister Sophie, fragile and bright, had been like a light in the dark chaos of his family life. Her death plunged him into despair. At the time, Munch was in his early 20s, searching for his artistic voice. The Paris salons wanted realism, smoothness, perfection. But Munch did not care about polished surfaces. He wanted to paint what grief felt like. That's why The Sick Child looks rough, almost unfinished. Because grief itself is unfinished. Artistic process. Munch's technique shocked the art world. He used thin layers of paint, scraping and scratching the surface, creating a trembling, almost flickering image. Sophie's face is pale, fragile, fading into the canvas. Her lips are slightly parted as if in a final breath. A handkerchief lies limp in her hand, a symbol of her fading fight. Beside her, the figure of a woman, often interpreted as their Aunt Karen, leans forward, her face buried in grief. The entire painting is suffused with a greenish-yellow haze, the sickly glow of illness and memory. Brushstrokes are restless, nervous, refusing to settle, just as Munch's own heart could never settle around this memory. It was not about beauty. It was about truth. Historical and social context. Tuberculosis was called the White Plague of the 19th century. It claimed millions, including many in Munch's own family. His mother died of it when Edvard was just 5. His sister Sophie followed soon after. For many, TB was not just an illness, but a shadow that haunted every household. Munch's The Sick Child captured this collective fear. It was not simply his story, it was the story of countless families across Europe. Symbolism and interpretation. The painting's power lies in its raw simplicity. The pale face of Sophie represents not only her fading life, but also the fragility of all human existence. The grieving figure embodies those left behind, drowned in sorrow, unable to look up. The nervous brushstrokes suggest memory itself, blurred, unstable, as if the scene is constantly dissolving in tears. Art historians often say this was the moment Munch found his true voice. He was no longer trying to please critics, he was painting his soul. Reception and legacy. When The Sick Child was first exhibited in 1886, critics were merciless. They called it ugly, unfinished, even offensive to the traditions of art. But Munch knew he had created something different. He later said, "This was the breakthrough work for me, it was my first truly personal picture." Over time the world caught up. What critics once saw as flaws, later generations recognized as genius. The Sick Child became a cornerstone of modern expressionism, opening the door for artists to paint not just what they see but what they feel. Munch would revisit the theme of this painting again and again throughout his life, creating multiple versions, as if he could never fully release Sophie from his canvas, or from his heart. Closing note. The Sick Child is not just a painting. It is a wound on canvas. A brother's eternal grief. When you stand before it, you do not just see Sophie, you feel her absence. You feel Munch's trembling hand, his breaking heart. And you understand why, for Edvard Munch, art was never decoration. It was survival. It was memory. It was mourning. And in The Sick Child, his mourning became immortal. That's a glimpse into the life and work of this amazing artist. If you enjoyed it, like, subscribe and hit the bell. Tell us in the comments which painting moved you most. And remember, art is not just seen, it's felt.